Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. This new edition starts right now. The fourth round of talks to revise the North American Free Trade Agreement is getting underway outside Washington, D.C. On the same day, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is meeting U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. Trudeau is expected to try to remind Trump of the trade pact's merits, but a series of contentious new U.S. demands could threaten the talks with collapse. From Washington, Trudeau is due to fly to Mexico for discussions with President Enrique Peña Nieto. As the renegotiation of the 23-year-old trade agreement becomes increasingly acrimonious, Mexico accuses U.S. President Donald Trump of spoiling for a protectionist war. The Mexican Foreign Minister Luis Videgaray warned lawmakers that the NAFTA talks could lead to a breaking point in relations with the United States and Mexico. He said Mexico is prepared to leave the NAFTA agreement if it has to. One U.S. business lobby has accused the Trump administration of making a poison pill proposal to sabotage renegotiations.
What we can't allow is that a free trade agreement stops being for free trade. If red tape, restrictions, administration, tariffs and barriers are introduced, then this defeats the purpose of the agreement, and that doesn't suit Mexico. We have to be prepared to say no, and if necessary to walk out of the talks, and if necessary we will leave the treaty. Mexico is bigger than NAFTA.
Our correspondents in the United States and Mexico are following these NAFTA negotiations. Let's go first to Jorge Justoso in Washington. Mr. Justoso, have the meeting between U.S. President Trump and the Canadian President, has it begun as yet? Justin Trudeau?
Yes, it did. And at this very moment, at this hour, they are absolutely getting together in the Oval Office. Mr. Trudeau arrived around 2 p.m. And about 15 minutes later, both of them gave us very small press conference announcing that they're going to discuss trade, but also they're going to discuss defense. Let me tell you that what is going on at this very moment here in Washington, in the outskirts of Washington, in Arlington, Virginia, they're taking place the fourth round of negotiations about NAFTA, and that is taking place behind closed doors. So there's a divorce here between the people who are negotiating or renegotiating the trade agreement, NAFTA, and what the President and the Prime Minister of Canada are discussing. So not necessarily the two elements or the two entities goes in the same direction, so much so that it did happen exactly the same thing with the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where any government of any of the different countries that were members of that pact were aware of the march of the negotiations. Here, what it did take place this morning, I want to share it with you, is that, for example, at the footsteps of the Capitol, many members of the Democratic Party were giving a press conference complaining about the way that those negotiations are starting to go, and requesting, for example, what is called in English ISDS. That means the Investor-State Dispute Settlement. That is a tribunal that settles disputes between the corporations and the different governments will be removed. Why? Because in the past, many huge corporations were requesting different amounts of money, millions of dollars of retaliations regarding deals that they took place within the NAFTA agreement. And in terms of consequences of the free trade agreement, NAFTA, I want to mention that these Democrats were denouncing that, for example, 1 million jobs were lost in the US, 2 million jobs were lost in Mexico. The Mexican workers lost about 9% of their income regarding their salaries. So the notion of go ahead with the agreement is encountering a lot of resistance, so much so that, for example, in the front of the hotel in Arlington, Virginia, where the fourth round of negotiations are taking place, are already going on some demonstrations against the agreement and requesting the scrap of the agreement. The same thing of many trade organizations. When I'm talking about the request of eliminating the ISDS, we're talking that the Democrat congressmen are bringing 400,000 petitions to remove that clause. 35 organizations, including NGOs and different organizations like think tanks, are also requesting that. So the positions are very far apart. We have to wait and see what is coming from that meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau, and it's a little bit early to jump in speculations. We'd rather wait and see and share it with you.
Mr. Justoto, in their previous meeting, people were commenting on how uncomfortable Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau were. Do you think that Mr. Trudeau can convince his U.S. counterparts to stay with the NAFTA trade agreement? How optimistic are you that Canada can persuade the U.S. that the agreement still has merits?
Let's base our comments on facts. And the fact is that the agenda of Prime Minister Trudeau is trade. The agenda that at least the official rhetoric of Mr. Trump is protectionism of the American worker. How far apart or how close they could get in that meeting, difficult to guess while the whole thing is taking place.
Thank you so much, Mr. Justoto. That was our correspondent in the United States, Jorge Justoto, giving us the U.S. feedback on the current trade renegotiation process for NAFTA. More news in a minute. Stay with us. At least 13 people were killed when Mexican security forces tried to control a fight at a prison in the northern state of Nuevo León. 8 others were severely injured in that disturbance at the Cadereyta prison. Local media say 250 inmates battled with security forces. The state government said lethal force had been used to regain full control of the facility, while anxious family members gathered outside the prison to wait for news of their loved ones. With just under a week until regional elections in Venezuela, campaigning is in full swing. Electoral material is already being distributed to various states, heading to more than 13,500 voting centers.
This Sunday, more than 18 million Venezuelans are eligible for the vote that will see government and opposition dispute 23 states. Candidates use the last campaign days to display their political machinery. Campaign fairs and campaigning close this Friday.
Nunca vamos a rendirnos ante...
Opposition leaders are also calling their supporters to vote, including those who engaged in violent protests. Leaders of the Mud Coalition have been trying to convince these fringe supporters that the electorate is the new weapon. This after 4 months of violence left over 100 dead and hundreds more injured.
The Chavistas are not only struggling to maintain local governor positions in a completely unfavorable context. Right now, they hold 20 out of 23. It's not only about keeping them, because what is at stake is the country's stability. The opposition has already announced that wherever they win the elections, they're going to use the local government as a platform to oust the federal government. We have seen opposition municipalities doing this for several years. They use their institutions, their local police forces, to allow plunders and violent flashpoints. That's what we saw in the violent 120-day-long period that Venezuela just went through.
The government says the double standard of the opposition defies logic.
Those who participate in elections after repeating that they wouldn't, those who are going to allow the Electoral Council to count the ballots after saying the council was useless, those who neglect and insult Chavistas, now they look like little sheep saying, please vote for me, I'll help you.
Electoral Council, the CNE, says that opposition parties have all evaluated the election's audit processes. It's a move that contradicts the opposition's usual narrative to discredit the country's electoral process. Regan Devines for Telesur English in Caracas, Venezuela.
A Brazilian congressional report has recommended that President Michel Temer should not face trial on a second set of corruption charges involving the obstruction of justice and membership in a criminal organization. The report by Congressman Bonifacio de Andrade argued that the charges be shelved because they are, quote, unfounded. The charges still have to be voted on by the Constitution and Justice Committee of the lower house and in the full house. At the same time, Brazil's Supreme Court is ruling on a corruption case against Aécio Neves, a leader of the right-wing PSDB party. The political atmosphere in Ecuador is increasingly tense ahead of an expected announcement on new economic measures intended to boost the country's economy. Ian Bruce has the details.
Yes. Anxious expectation. I think that's the best way of describing the mood here in Ecuador as we're waiting for the announcement by President Lenin Moreno of a major set of economic changes. Now, more or less taxes in Ecuador may not seem like major international news, so I think it's important to understand why this announcement is being seen as a watershed moment for this government just 5 months after it came into office. And why it's been seen as an indication of where Lenin Moreno wants to take the country, whether the path he wants to follow will be similar to or very different from that of the previous 10 years under President Rafael Correa, with what people call here his citizen revolution. Now, 2 weeks ago, Lenin Moreno held a series, as part of his national dialogue, held talks with the business sector here in Ecuador, business leaders who traditionally support the right-wing opposition in the country. And they made a series of proposals, 139 proposals for economic measures which they would like to see implemented. We don't know yet, that's what we're going to hear soon, we believe, which of these measures President Moreno has decided to accept. But we were told, or rather one of the business leaders told the press yesterday that he understood that Lenin Moreno had agreed to accept 86% of the 139 proposals. So what are these measures? I'm not going to go through all 139 of them, but I think we can single out 3 main areas. Firstly, taxes. The business sector, apparently almost 60 of the proposals have to do with reducing the tax burden on private businesses. Amongst those, one of the most important is the current system whereby private businesses have to pay part or all of the tax on their profits up front. They want that eliminated. It seems that President Moreno has not accepted that, but that he has agreed, probably we believe, to scale back that mechanism and agree to a number of the other proposals to reduce the tax burden on private businesses. Second area, the labour market, flexibility in the labour market. The business leaders want much more flexibility here. In fact, it does seem that the President Moreno has drawn a red line against reintroducing short-term, fixed-term contracts and zero-hour contracts. Those were both banned. They are currently banned. They were banned under President Correa. It doesn't seem he will accept that, but it does seem he will agree to other measures to introduce more flexible working hours. The third area, free trade. the business leaders want the government to negotiate a free trade deal with the United States. Now that, I think, is one area that would be politically very difficult indeed for the president to agree. All of this has to be understood in the context of a really quite bitter dispute between the current president, Lenin Moreno, and the previous president, Rafael Correa, who has said strongly that he feels that this current government is trying to unwind, to undo many of the most progressive measures introduced during his 2 terms in office. And of course this also comes in the context of last week's major announcements or major events when the vice president, seen as close to President Rafael Correa, Jorge Glass, was jailed, given a preventive detention as he's investigated under corruption charges to do with the Odebrecht Brazilian construction group. And the second big event last week was the announcement of a plebiscite, a referendum by President Moreno to consult, and one of the key questions there has to do with presidential terms, which the supporters of President Correa see as a means to prevent Rafael Correa from ever standing for the president of Ecuador again. We'll bring you more from Quito when we hear exactly what the president has to say.
Thank you, Ian Bruce, for that update right here in Ecuador. A march for Mapuche resistance has taken place in Chile in the lead-up to Indigenous Resistance Day on the 12th of October. Mapuche leaders and important authorities were present at the demonstration, but isolated incidents triggered a brutal response from the Chilean police.
They arrived in Santiago from different Wallmapu communities to lead the Mapuche resistance march, just as the conflict with the Chilean government is at its most critical point.
At present, there's a decolonization process in the area, and a lot of people are asking why there's violence. I don't know of any similar process in the world where there hasn't been any violence. The government carries out violence, we defend ourselves.
More than 60 Mapuche villagers have been arrested in recent years under the anti-terrorist law, which was inherited from the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. Most of them are free now without any incriminating evidence, even though the law allows evidence from unidentified witnesses. Lonco Victor Queipul is one of them, detained during Operation Hurricane that still has 8 leaders in jail.
This investigation, this accusation, is not serious in any way. It just seeks to repress and persecute the leaders who for a long time have been raising our voices, looking for our own way, this way, that at some point was denied and stripped from us.
Thousands of hectares of Asian territory that are in the hands of multinational forest companies are being claimed for the Mapuche as theirs.
That's why there's no room for any special law the Chilean state could create, not even with the military out. But with the awareness we have in our struggle and the identity we've always had as Mapuche, they won't create it. Even when we're in jail, in the territories, the fight will continue, and that's our commitment.
A fight that today is marked by different points of resistance. The government promised to accuse 4 villagers on hunger strike under the anti-terrorist law, while the Machi Francisca Lincoln now will have to face in the next days the final trial for her alleged involvement in the attack against the Lanchester Mackay landowners.
We're very much interested in the fight the oppressed are giving, in Latin America especially. We know our struggle is against capitalism, against any of its forms, especially in these recent times, and that is where we think we should come together with the other fighting peoples, the oppressed of this continent.
A transversal fight that in Chile has the Mapuche people in the sights of the state prosecution once again was that brutally repressed.
Paola Dragnik, Telesur, Chile.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Spain's Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy addressed Parliament on Wednesday, rejecting the results of the independence vote in Catalonia. Following the announcement by the Catalan Prime Minister Carles Puigdemont on Tuesday, Rajoy held an emergency cabinet meeting in Madrid where they discussed the use of Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, which would effectively do away with Catalonia's autonomous status. At Parliament, the Spanish Prime Minister ruled out any form of dialogue over Catalan independence, labeling the push for independence as expressly forbidden by Article 2 of the Constitution.
No one can have liked what happened on October 1st. No one can be happy or satisfied, either with the image shown or the farce of voting, and the very obvious manipulations aimed that day against the Spanish National Police and Civil Guard. None of this needed to happen, but the only ones responsible are those who were obsessed with carrying out this action, knowing it was absolutely unviable.
Our correspondent in Barcelona, Joan Ortiz, has the latest.
¿Qué tal? Saludos, ¿cómo estás? Bueno, ¿y qué se esperaba?
We already knew that the government line, as of days, is not going to change, and it's going to stay with what it's decided. You can see how radical 2 million Catalans would seem, those wanting independence, compared to 47 million Spaniards of the population. It's a minority that can do very little, or at least that's how the Spanish government thinks, especially with a legal framework at this moment. Rajoy said that it's up to Puigdemont to return to institutional normality. The Catalan president has challenged the law, and he's being attacked as disloyal, that the referendum represents a breach of the Catalan statutes and tribunals. They've been saying that the laws are being done in accordance with what citizens want, that the Constitution and what the population wants, and what it's expressed at the polls. It's in general what the general line is, that the government cannot dialogue if there's an imposition. If there is a questioning of the unity of the Spanish territory. He thanked the police force and the civil guards for their actions last week and thinks that democracy cannot be aside of the law. He spoke about the international awareness, international warnings, because of the political situation, because of the terrorist attacks of the past 17th of August, and he claimed that a future no one can think of themselves as feeling superior. It's remarkable that because this has never been seen before in the Congress. In the Instagram account of Puigdemont, he posted a chessboard with blurred chess pieces at the front as the pawns, with all of them blurred except for one where it's an hourglass with a text that it's the time for the Catalan Republic. After a CNN interview, he said that everything comes to a negotiation and an offer of dialogue without any conditions, with two representatives each from the Spanish and Catalan governments. Puigdemont said that the Spanish state has to recognize the Catalan reality expressed by the majority who want independence. So there was a declaration yesterday which was suspended, and it looks like nothing has advanced because everything seems the same, the positions are the same. What's going to happen, we don't know, and that's what we're got to say.
That was Joan Ortiz in Barcelona. Tension between North Korea and the United States has increased another notch after reports from South Korea said Pyongyang is preparing to test another long-range missile. Isiara Diaz has the details from Beijing.
Good morning to you and to all the viewers on Telesur. Tensions in the Korean peninsula are increasing. This time, Japanese media has said, according to U.S., Japanese, and South Korean sources, the Popular Democratic Republic of Korea has finished the development of a new intercontinental.
Según Washington, Seúl y Tokio, Pyongyang se prepara para en los próximos días realizar un nuevo lanzamiento de misil o ensayo nuclear. Los expertos coinciden en que este nuevo misil balístico intercontinental es más grande y de mayor longitud, superior entonces al ya conocido Walson 14. Además, en una nueva demostración de fuerza ante la República Popular Democrática de Corea, Estados Unidos y sus aliados.
Now, let's take a look at some of the other stories happening around the world.
French union members continued protesting over Macron's planned labour reforms in what has been one of the largest collective strikes by all of France's unions in decades. Students and pensioners have joined the workers' unions in taking to the streets to denounce the president's economic reforms, which will affect hospitals, schools and transport services.
What we want is the government to hear what is said here, to notice that there's a fundamental discomfort, dissatisfaction, and above all, on October 16.
Opposition protesters clashed with police in Nairobi as tensions rise over the failure to reform the electoral board, which was behind the annulled presidential elections in August. The protests come ahead of the election rerun on October 26. A renewed set of protests in the capital come following the announcement that opposition leader Raila Odinga will not be running in October's rerun on grounds that the electoral body has failed to secure a fair ballot. Incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta has announced that the election will still go ahead despite Odinga's withdrawal. Troops from the Syrian Democratic Forces have begun a final assault against the Islamic State group in their last stronghold of Raqqa. The force, which is said to be made up of a collective of Kurdish, Arab and Assyrian soldiers, began their offensive in what is said to be the Islamic State's last line of defence. The attack comes following the successful liberation of Mosul, which was seen as the group's stronghold in Iraq. The United Nations African Union mission has awarded Chinese peacekeepers with the Peace Medal of Honor Award for their ongoing work in the Darfur region. The peacekeepers who arrived in the region last December have been heralded for completing 89 projects which span development construction work to defence facility upgrades.
The award ceremony is both a commendation about the Chinese peacekeepers and an inspiration for us. We'll keep on fulfilling our peacekeeping mission with even greater enthusiasm.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe began campaigning for December's snap election, which he called 2 years early. One of Abe's major policies is his tough talk on North Korea, which remains central to his recent growth in popularity after suffering a slump in approval ratings in the summer. North Koreans had promised to abandon nuclear development over and over again, but unfortunately they have broken the promises. They used our goodwill and dialogues to buy time and develop nuclear arms and missiles. We cannot afford to be deceived anymore.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For this and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Sweeney Gray. Thank you so much for watching.